Making America Great Again through higher tariffs. On Wednesday, President Trump introduced a bold move to address the persistent trade imbalance with approximately 90 countries by implementing reciprocal tariffs. These tariffs exceed the usual 10% import tax, targeting nations from China to the European Union in an effort to balance the U.S. trade deficit. Dubbed as Liberation Day by the president, this policy aims to restore fairness in global trade and prioritize the American economy. The new strategy will subject some countries to a flat 10% tariff, while others will face steeper rates tailored to their trade relationships with the U.S. For instance, Australia will incur the baseline 10%, but China will face a hefty 34% tariff. As President Trump emphasized, reciprocal means they do it to us and we do it to them. Simple formula to calculate tariffs. The administration adopted a straightforward method to determine the appropriate tariff rates. By dividing the trade deficit with a given country by its exports to the U.S. and then multiplying by 1/2, the U.S. calculates the tariff rate. This approach, initially proposed by journalist James Surowiecki and endorsed by Wall Street analysts, provides an effective way to tackle trade imbalances. For example, in 2024, the U.S. trade deficit with China stood at $295.4 billion, while imports from China amounted to $439.9 billion. This means that China's trade surplus with the U.S. is 67% of the value of its exports, leading to the imposition of tariffs on their goods. Here are the 10 countries most affected by the new tariffs. 1. Lesotho. Location: a landlocked nation within South Africa, covering 30,000 square kilometers. Reason for tariffs: Lesotho, heavily dependent on textile exports under the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, has seen its textile trade affected due to U.S. tariffs designed to protect domestic industries. Exports to the U.S. Roughly $500 million in 2020, mostly apparel and textile products. 2. Saint Pierre and Miquelon. Location: a French territory off Newfoundland, Canada. Reason for tariffs: while not fully independent, the territory faces U.S. tariffs on seafood products like cod. Exports to the U.S. primarily seafood, including cod and other marine products. 3. Cambodia. Location: Southeast Asia, bordered by Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, and the Gulf of Thailand. Reason for tariffs: a major exporter of textiles and garments to the U.S., Cambodia's industries are impacted by the tariffs intended to reduce the U.S. trade deficit and protect American manufacturers. Exports to the U.S. About $4 billion in 2020, primarily textiles and footwear. 4. Laos. Location: a landlocked Southeast Asian nation bordered by Vietnam, China, Thailand, Myanmar, and Cambodia. Reason for tariffs: Laos mainly exports textiles and agricultural goods, which are now subject to higher U.S. tariffs. Exports to the U.S. approximately $300 million in 2020, largely textiles. 5. Madagascar. Location: an island nation off Southeast Africa near Mozambique. Reason for tariffs: Madagascar's textile exports and spice products, such as vanilla, have been impacted by U.S. tariffs aimed at safeguarding American industries. Exports to the U.S. around $500 million in 2020, mostly textiles and spices. 6. Vietnam. Location: Southeast Asia, bordered by China, Laos, Cambodia, and the South China Sea. Reason for tariffs: criticized for rerouting goods through China to bypass tariffs, Vietnam faced U.S. tariffs on textiles, steel, footwear, and electronics. Exports to the U.S. roughly $80 billion in 2020, mainly electronics, textiles, and footwear. 7. Sri Lanka. Location: an island nation in South Asia, south of India. Reason for tariffs: Sri Lanka, a key exporter of textiles and tea, faces higher tariffs due to the Trump administration's trade policies. Exports to the U.S. around $2 billion in 2020, primarily textiles and tea. 8. Myanmar, Burma. Location, Southeast Asia, bordered by China, Thailand, Laos, India, and Bangladesh. Reason for tariffs. Myanmar's textiles and agricultural exports have been subjected to U.S. tariffs due to political and human rights concerns under Trump's administration. Exports to the U.S. About $500 million in 2020, mainly textiles. 9. Falkland Islands. Location, a British overseas territory in the South Atlantic Ocean near Argentina. Reason for tariffs. Exports from the Falklands, especially seafood, are targeted by U.S. tariffs under Trump's trade policies. Exports to the U.S., primarily seafood. 10. Syria. Location, in the Middle East, bordering Turkey, Iraq, Jordan, Israel, and Lebanon. Reason for tariffs. Syria is under comprehensive U.S. sanctions due to political and human rights issues, which have severely limited trade. Exports to the U.S. Minimal due to sanctions. Economic impact and potential retaliation. President Trump argued that these reciprocal tariffs would bolster U.S. manufacturing and create a more level playing field against countries that impose higher tariffs on U.S. exports. However, economists caution that these tariffs could spur inflationary pressures and provoke retaliatory measures, with foreign nations raising tariffs on American goods. The primary goal is to reduce the U.S. trade deficit and encourage more equitable global trade practices. Ultimately, this strategy seeks to reshape trade dynamics to benefit American workers and industries while addressing long-standing trade imbalances.